My wedding day didn't end with a honeymoon, but with a frantic race against a shadow organization determined to frame me for a lifetime of their crimes. I walked down the aisle a bride, but I left that altar a ghost, because when the man I loved turned out to be the mastermind of a vast illicit network, he realized too late that he hadn't just framed a wife. He had accidentally armed his greatest threat. The church bells were still ringing in my head like a funeral knell, a hollow, rhythmic pounding that matched the frantic thumping of my heart. I was wearing my wedding dress, a vintage lace creation that now felt like a heavy, suffocating shroud. It had been 4 hours since Mark stood at the altar, looked me in the eye with a gaze that held nothing but icy detachment, and announced to 300 guests that he couldn't marry a woman with secrets. He didn't even have the decency to elaborate. He just turned, walked out of the nave, and left me standing there, a spectacle of absolute ruin in white silk. I didn't cry. I was past crying. I felt a cold, sharp clarity that only comes when your entire reality shatters. I had left my life, my apartment, and my future with him, and I knew exactly what I needed: my passport, my grandmother's journals, and the emergency cash I kept in the floor safe. If I was going to disappear, I needed the tools to do it. The wedding venue was a secluded estate on the outskirts of the city, a place he had chosen for its privacy. Now, in the twilight, it felt like a cage. I drove back, the silence of the car suffocating, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned a ghostly white. When I pulled up to the main house, the place was dark, but I knew the security codes. I had picked up the spare key from the hidden rock, a ritual we'd shared when we first moved in. I didn't care about the guests, the catering staff, or the gossip. I just wanted my box. I pushed open the heavy oak door, the hinges groaning in the stillness. The foyer smelled of stale lilies and expensive champagne. My footsteps echoed, sharp and rhythmic, as I made my way toward the study. I reached the handle of the study door, my heart pounding in my throat, when the sudden harsh glare of a flashlight blinded me. I froze, my breath hitching. A figure stepped out from the shadows near the grand staircase. It wasn't Mark. It was his brother, Elias, who had been conspicuously absent from the wedding ceremony. He was holding something at his side, something heavy and dark, wrapped in a tactical bag that looked entirely out of place in this opulent hallway. "You really shouldn't have come back, Emily," Elias said, his voice devoid of his usual playful charm. He sounded like a stranger. "You were supposed to be halfway to the airport by now. The plan was simple. You disappear, and we move on." "Move on?" I stammered, my voice trembling but gaining strength. "Where is Mark? I want my things, and then I'm leaving." Elias chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "Mark isn't coming back, and you aren't leaving with anything. You walked right into a disaster zone. Do you have any idea what's in that safe you're so desperate to get to?" My blood ran cold. I hadn't told anyone about the safe, not even Mark. My stomach dropped as I realized the secrets he had mentioned at the altar weren't mine. They were his. "I don't know what you're talking about," I whispered, taking a cautious step back toward the door. "Don't lie to me," Elias hissed, stepping closer. The light from his torch flickered over the wall, illuminating a small, red, blinking light behind a painting, a camera I had never seen before. "We found the illegal weapon you stashed in the study. We found the logs linking you to that organized scheme. And the internal security team is already on their way here, Emily. They don't want you for a broken heart. They want you for the attempt to break the law, and they don't take kindly to people who play both sides." He raised his hand, and for the first time, I saw the metallic glint of a set of heavy-duty restraints. My vision blurred. I turned to run, but the door behind me, the only way out, was slammed shut by a shadow standing in the threshold. I wasn't just jilted. I had been framed for a crime so massive it would put me away for decades. As the heavy lock clicked into place, I realized I wasn't trapped in a house anymore. I was trapped in a nightmare. The click of the lock reverberated through the hall like a gunshot. I spun around, my lace skirts tangling around my ankles, desperate to find an exit. But the heavy oak door was now a solid barrier of mahogany and iron. The shadow in the threshold stepped into the sliver of moonlight filtering through the foyer's high windows. It was Victor, Mark's head of security, a man who had always looked at me with a polite, vacant stare. Now his expression was predatory, his suit jacket bulging with the distinct, heavy outline of illegal weapons tucked into a shoulder holster. "The internal security team is 5 minutes out, Emily," Victor said, his voice flat, professional, and terrifying. "They aren't looking for a bride, they're looking for an operative, and you've made their job very easy by returning to the scene of the crime." I pressed my back against the wall, my lungs burning. "I don't know what you're talking about," I screamed, the lace of my dress catching on a splinter in the wood. "I'm just a teacher. Mark and he set me up." Elias approached slowly, tossing a small, sleek device onto the marble floor. It skittered to my feet. It was a digital tablet, its screen displaying grainy, manipulated footage of me handing off heavy bags of restricted substances in a parking garage 3 weeks ago. It was a masterpiece of digital deception, a total fabrication meant to bury me under a mountain of evidence. "You see?" Elias murmured, hovering over me like a hawk. "In the eyes of the law, you're the mastermind of a vast, illicit network. Mark was just your cover, the poor, unsuspecting fiancé who discovered your true nature just in time to report you. He's already in the wind, Emily. He's halfway across the border, leaving behind the perfect scapegoat. You're the one holding the bag. You're the one who will be handed a massive sentence for this organized scheme." My mind raced, every memory of the past year clicking into a horrifying new context. The strange phone calls, the late-night meetings Mark insisted were business, the way he'd made me sign those prenuptial documents that were actually power of attorney forms. He hadn't just been using me, he had been building a cage for me for months. "Why?" I choked out, tears finally streaming down my face, ruining the expensive makeup I'd spent hours on. I loved him. "Love is a luxury for people who aren't dealing with federal investigators," Victor replied, pulling a pair of zip ties from his belt. "Move, and you'll get more than just a charge for the illegal weapon in the study. You'll be lucky to leave this house in one piece." I didn't have time to process the threat before Victor lunged. I dodged, my heels clicking frantically against the marble as I scrambled toward the grand staircase. My only hope was the service elevator, a secret passage I'd discovered by accident during the venue renovation. I sprinted, my dress tearing with every violent movement, the sound of heavy boots thundering behind me. I reached the narrow door behind the velvet curtains, ripping it open, but I didn't get inside. A hand clamped onto my shoulder, spinning me around with bone-jarring force. Elias pinned me against the railing, his face inches from mine, his eyes wild with a sudden, frantic urgency. He wasn't just working for Mark, he was terrified of someone else. "Listen to me," he hissed, his grip bruising my skin. "Mark didn't just frame you. He stole something from the wrong people, the kind of people who don't wait for the law. They're here, Emily. They're already inside the perimeter. If you stay here, the security team won't be your biggest problem. The real owners of those packages are coming for their cut, and they don't care that you're just a pawn. At that exact moment, the front door didn't just open. It exploded inward in a shower of splinters and glass. Through the dust, 3 men dressed in black, their faces masked, stepped into the foyer. They weren't police. They carried heavy illegal weaponry with a practiced, lethal ease. The lead man scanned the room, his eyes locking directly onto me. He pointed a weapon, not at Elias, but at my chest. The game had shifted. I wasn't just the suspect anymore. I was the bait in a war I didn't even know was happening, and the bullets were already chambered. The blast wave knocked the breath from my lungs, leaving me sprawled on the cold marble, my wedding dress stained with dust and the grit of shattered mahogany. The men in black didn't hesitate. They moved with a synchronized, terrifying fluidity, circling the room like sharks. Elias had dropped to the floor, hands raised, his earlier arrogance replaced by the hollow panic of a man who realized he'd played a game he didn't understand. Victor, however, didn't surrender. He reached for his holster, but the lead intruder was faster. A single muffled crack echoed, and Victor collapsed, his weapon skidding across the floor. I was trapped between the stairs and the threshold of the service passage, my heart hammering against my ribs like a frantic bird. The lead man stalked toward me, his weapon lowered but ready. He wasn't looking at Elias. He was looking at the small, leather-bound journal still clutched in my hand, the one I'd grabbed from the study before Elias stopped me. "The ledger, Emily," the man said, his voice a gravelly monotone. "Hand it over, and you might live to regret ever meeting Mark." I realized then what Mark had actually done. He hadn't just framed me. He had stolen the internal tracking records of an entire underground supply chain. He had intended to use me as a distraction, a sacrificial lamb to draw the heat from the internal security investigation while he vanished with the data. But he hadn't realized that the people he stole from were faster than the law. "I don't have the ledger," I lied, my voice steadying with a sudden cold resolve. "Mark took the drive. He's at the private airstrip on the North Ridge. You're killing the wrong person." The man paused, his eyes narrowing behind his mask. He signaled to one of his associates, who grabbed Elias by the collar. "Is she lying?" Elias, sweating and trembling, stammered, No, she's right. He's at the Ridge. He left us to die so he could take the payout." The lead man stared at me for an agonizing second, weighing my life against his target. Then, with a curt nod, he gestured toward the door. "If you're lying, we'll find you. You're a ghost now anyway." They vanished into the night, their movements silent and swift, leaving the mansion in a deafening, ringing silence. I didn't wait. I didn't look back at the ruin of the wedding or the broken body of the man who had tried to hand me over to a prison cell. I ripped the bottom half of my ruined dress off to allow myself to run, scrambled through the service passage, and exited into the woods behind the estate. I had my car hidden in the thicket, a modest sedan I'd purchased under a separate identity months ago, anticipating that things might go south, though I never imagined they would go this far. I drove until the sun began to bleed over the horizon, my hands still trembling, my mind reeling. I opened the journal I'd kept. The one I told them didn't exist. It wasn't just a list of names, it was the original, handwritten log of every transaction, every offshore account, and every bribe paid to the officials protecting this network. It was the key to tearing the entire organized scheme down to the foundation. Mark thought he had built a cage for me, but he had actually handed me the key to his own destruction. I found a payphone in a quiet, isolated town 3 states away. I didn't call the police. I didn't call the local authorities. I called the one number I'd seen in the encrypted emails on Mark's laptop, the direct line to the Federal Oversight Committee, the only ones with the clearance to handle this. I left the ledger in a secure Dropbox at a courier station, addressed to an investigator I knew was untouchable. As I walked away, I saw the news flashing on a monitor in a nearby cafe, a headline about a private plane crash at a remote airstrip. There were no survivors, and the authorities had already begun seizing assets from the estate I had just fled. I changed my name, dyed my hair, and moved to a city where the sky was always gray, and no one knew the woman who once wore white lace. I was free, but more than that, I was the one who had finally won. The men who hunted me were now the ones being hunted by the very system they thought they controlled. I finally understood the secret Mark feared. I was never the victim. I was the witness who would never stop talking until the last of them was behind bars. I ordered a coffee, sat by the window, and watched the world move on, knowing that for the first time in my life, the story was entirely mine to tell.